based in Houston, Avanade. Is that correct? And what is your title?
Experience Design Manager.
There you go, Experience Design Manager.
And what's this book called?
It's a Riley book.
No, it's New Writers.
New Writers.
It's called Information Architecture Blueprints for the Web.
Thank you.
I actually have that book.
Yeah, I would imagine a lot of, and it's in the third printing, is that right?
Second edition.
Multiple printings,
It's
yeah.
dense. It's a big book.
Austin has, what was I, sorry, I lost my train of thought again, sorry. Good thing I'm not giving the presentation. I had a chance to spend some time with Austin today, and he was telling me a little bit about his presentation, and I think we decided that was a little bit ironic that we were meeting in a classroom where clearly this class that's being taught is an Agile class. But he's going to talk about kind of beyond Agile, a very interesting topic of conversation. And I also know that he has 2 darling children.
Yes. You know what? I don't have any pictures.
Oh my gosh, I was just going to ask if you had any pictures. And Austin has also agreed we're trying something a little different tonight. We're going to be recording him, and as you can see, he has already made his slide presentation available on SlideShare. So let me ask everyone to give you a round of applause. Austin Gavella.
All right, I'm a little nervous. I did a bunch of changes to the presentation. I was actually supposed to give this at this last year's big design conference, but I had to cancel. So I was very happy to was able to come up here now. Typically in my presentations, I really focus on giving people something very tactical and practical they can walk out with and use tomorrow, and not just kind of like a few bullet points practical, but specific things you can do and how you can apply them. So this one is a little bit more on the theory side, right? A little less on the tactical side. At the end, I do try and come back to some tactical stuff. But I'm having, and part of the reason I'm doing this is I'm having trouble getting the bridge from how people typically think about things today to where I think they should be thought about, and then there's the tactics that stem out of that. So it's kind of hard to squeeze all that in. I ditched tons and tons of slides, and we're still at like 38, and we'll see how long we can get through them, but hopefully I can zip through. So I was an English major. I went to UT in Austin, and in one of my first critical theory class, the professor said there are 3 things you need to keep in mind with everyone you read. So that applies when you talk to, right? So when you listen to, like me. The first thing is, who are they? Right? The second thing is, what are they trying to say? And the third thing is, why are they telling you that, right? They want you to do something. What I want you to do, right, is I'm coming up here. I'm hoping I can change the way you think so you can change the way other people think, because I think this is where things should be going, right? And if we keep going where we're going, we're kind of like a scattered diaspora right now. So that's enough of introductory rambling. So we're going to go ahead and start with introductions. Ignore the man behind the curtain. There we go. So I'm coming up here to share, right? So I have this idea. There's no other reason. I'm not in town because I'm passing through. I specifically flew up here so I could share my story with you. But in order for any relationship, the sharing has to be reciprocal. So it's important for me that at the end you think about questions you have, comments if you think I'm full of shit. I posted the slides. Someone already responded on Twitter and said that is not my experience, which if you know him, that is his droll way of saying that's it. So this is, I'm looking for that. That's why if I wasn't looking for that, I would just post this on my blog, right? So I'm looking for the conversation. So to kind of get us in that mood, right? I want you all to think about what's the coolest thing about where you work, right? So if you ignore all the stuff that drives you crazy, what is the one coolest thing? So does everybody have that in their head? Do we need more time? Who doesn't have a coolest thing about where they work? Okay. All right. So hi, I'm Austin Gavella. I'm an experience design manager at Avanade, where we're reinventing how enterprises collaborate. This is a really handy sentence. I don't know if you've seen this. Christina Watke posted this on her blog, Elegant Hack. It's a way that a coach taught her to introduce herself to people. It's a pretty simple method. So first you start with hi. You have your name, right? You have your title role or whatever you do. Okay. It doesn't matter if they call you an interaction designer, but you feel like you're a usability analyst. Whatever. You just give them a handle, right? So your name, what do you do, the company where you work, and the coolest thing about where you work. All right, so does everybody have this? Okay, so here's kind of vaguely cheesy icebreakerish, but I want you to turn to two people over adjacent to you and recite this. Are you ready? We're gonna just take 2 minutes to do this.
Okay.
All right, we loosened up here. All right. Go ahead. Let's see you do it.
Hi, I'm Liz, a recruiter at Creative Circle, where we match people with their perfect skill set and job.
Hi, I'm Jeff Lapeer, a UI UX designer developer. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can actually have a voice.
That's awesome. Very good.
Okay, you need to now turn and introduce yourself to someone else.
Hi.
I'm a service designer at HP, and I have no idea what's cool about it. Because it's in the tank. And everything sucks. And I'll probably be fired in 3 or 4 months. So maybe even laid off.
Hi, I'm Liz.
Yes.
I'm a recruiter at Creative Circle,
What?
where we
Might be visiting.
exactly. And the coolest thing about where I work is really that we get to match people with skill sets. It's rewarding. I've been 13 years in advertising. 13 years in advertising. Most people are very
All right, that was awesome.
I am
That was brilliantly more awesome than I thought it was going to be. And now that you've all shared, you should be primed and ready for the end of the presentation, or even during to, feel free to throw stuff at me, shout things, say things, have questions lined up, catch me afterwards, flying saucer, talk my ear off, right? So this is a sharing thing. That's important. So I'm glad, and you should remember this. This is, career coaches teach this. Next time you introduce yourself to somebody, use this format, and you're setting yourself up for future success because you've already told them the coolest thing you do. They'll remember you later. So the next important thing is trust, right? So I'm about to tell you something that based on your background and your personal set of beliefs, may or may not be total anathema to you. But I need you to trust me that I'm not being an asshole, that I'm actually doing this out of the goodness of my heart. So we're going to do a mind game, and these are handy. This one's called The Customer's Always Right. Oh boy. So what happens in my day-to-day work, a customer will come in and tell me something, I'm thinking you were full of crap, right? This exercise is the customer's always right. And the way you're supposed to do it is you do it every day for a week. Anytime someone comes and tells you something and you think that they're wrong or maybe a little inaccurate, you stop yourself and say, no, they are absolutely right. And your job is to ask questions to figure out why they think the way they do. So we're going to, I'm going to show you how this works. Can I get a volunteer? Somebody? Okay, excellent. Okay. So, what's your name?
John.
Nice to meet you.
John.
John is not prepared. She brings her own.
No,
what she said,
that's
too.
cool.
John.
It's always a problem, especially in the night. You've forgotten all the names.
I'll know later, right?
All right. So, so we're going to practice. So I'm going to tell you something that's wrong. And your job is to ask questions to figure out why I think the way I do. And there are 2 questions.
Sure we shouldn't do the other one?
Maybe, I don't know. I've never done this like this before. So there's a format to it, right? The first thing is you acknowledge the disagreement, right? So you say like, well, I always thought X, right, which is an opposition of what that was Y. Can you tell me why you think Y?
I got a great example for you.
Okay.
Okay. You want to do it that way? I'm a customer. My application is a website developed in Cold Fusion. So, yeah, I want to put this information up, and I want to use Cold Fusion.
Why do I Cold Fusion? All right. So I'll say, hey, we'll say like so. I always thought cold fusion was an outdated language used by monkeys with no personal hygiene. Why would you like to use cold fusion?
Well, that's what I've always done. We have the server, that's all we can do.
See? Perfect. All right, so it's good. Thank you very much. Everybody give Joan a hand. All right, so if you hear something from me that sounds totally bonkers, crazy, or antithetical to your very being, assume I'm right. I am right. And your job is to ask me why I think the way I do. And you start by identifying the disagreement. I always thought X. Please tell me why you think Y. And then we'll go on. So is everybody ready? We're almost getting ready to start. I've got a couple more pieces of intro here. This is my manifesto. It's missing a middle piece because it didn't apply for this one. But a lot of times, I'm a UX guy. So a lot of designers think, I do all this hard work and my stuff gets built. But in truth, designers don't ever design anything. It's always organization. Developers don't build anything. The organization builds it. Marketers don't market anything. The organization markets it, right? You're part of a huge entity, and you can't be effective, right? You can't design something good, build something good, market something good, sell something good, unless everybody's doing it, right? So it doesn't matter how awesome you are. If the people you work with aren't there with you, it doesn't matter, right? The second thing is, a lot of times, some of these talks about tactics, right? And essentially changing what you're doing. But in reality, that's not the real problem a lot of times. Sometimes what you're doing is just fine. It's how you do it. And this presentation is all about changing how you approach something. Not changing your specific activities, not changing your role, not changing the types of meetings you have. It's how you do those exact same things. Change that to get better results. So, and there's an inspiration for this. A lot of times, you're thinking where I work now is so screwed up. We have all this can't get any traction. There's all this opposition against me. But I'm going to go to someplace else, and it's going to be fantastic. There's this great book by Paul Arden. He's an ad guy, and this book is targeted towards people in the ad world. But you can take the word advertising out of it and replace it with whatever your role is, wherever you are, and the book will totally apply to you. And one of the great things he says is you shouldn't be looking for your next opportunity to make things better, right? It's not going to be better later. The opportunity you have now is your next opportunity. So all of this stuff, don't stick in your pocket and think you can't use it, right? Like I said, one of the things they're really trying to do is how can you change how you engage now to get improvements where you are. You shouldn't have to go someplace else to rock it. So now we're finally going to talk about Agile. It's only been 10 minutes, so we're doing good on time here. So if y'all all familiar with the Agile Manifesto? Anyone not familiar with the Agile Manifesto? Okay. This is the Agile Manifesto. It sounds fantastic. All manifestos always sound fantastic. So they're full of these like epic, feel-good words, and they imply that the past is wrong and we're right. And you've got like this vision of how awesome the future is going to be. And so it goes like this, right? Individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Processes and tools, right? That's what it implies. Working software over documentation. Right? Documentation is bad, right? And you know they actually tell you why working software is better, right? Never discussed. Or why individual interactions are better than processes and tools. It's all just assumed by the way they've structured the manifesto. And all manifestos do this, right? Collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. And this is really funny, because Agile is totally full of shit here, right? Because all they do ever is follow plans, right? That's all they do. So all manifestos have this problem. When you see a bunch of nice sounding words that haven't been really explained or kind of quantified or qualified, those are kitten words, right? Those are like kitties. Everybody likes kittens. They're small, big eyes, fuzzy, cute, right? Very few people don't like kittens. But the question that Agile doesn't answer for you is whether or not, who cares if you like kittens? The question is, well, do I want a cat right now, right? Or maybe I really want a dog. We'll follow a plan. Do I need a cat? Should I have a cat, right? And this is the real Agile Manifesto. You take out all the kitten words and actually get it to what they're talking about. And this is one of the reasons why Agile often has such a conflict with user experience and design, right? So design is a modeling discipline. That's what designers do. They model things so they can learn, right? Whereas Agile developers, they build things so they can learn. Are you going to make a model? Or are you going to make a product, right? So it's not, it's a choice you make. So this is what they're saying, right? It's real people doing work instead of models of people doing work, right? That's contracts, right? It's a model of people doing work. Real software over models of software, right? Real collaboration over models of collaboration, and real learning over models of learning. So you see there's a specific bias here, right? That in the Agile world, they assume that the real thing, right, is better than the model of the thing, right? There's never any piece of Agile literature out there that ever describes why the real thing is better than the model of the thing. And to be fair, in the design world, there's very little discussion about why the model of the thing is better than the real thing, right? What they actually discuss in the design world is, well, what kind of fidelity of the model do I need before I get to the real thing, right? But no one ever discusses why you would choose one or the other. So that's an important point about Agile. And here are a couple more. So Agile is really concerned about the certainty of what's going to be built, right? That's the whole reason why they have the prioritized backlog. That's why they have short sprint times. And they want to minimize unnecessary change. So the part in the manifesto they talk about, they want to respond to changes of a plan that's crap. They don't want to respond to change. They want to get their plan just right, check it at the end of their 2-week sprint, and then do the next chunk of the plan. If they have to change, they change. That's fine. But they're not there because they like to do change. They're trying to minimize unnecessary change. They don't need to spend 6 months going in the wrong direction and then fix it, right? 6 months of bad velocity. They want to do 2 weeks of bad direction and then make a shorter change. They're just trying to minimize unnecessary change. And they value the build over everything else because that's certainty, right? That's what they want. They want certainty, and that's fair. Agile came out of engineering groups that were at the bottom end of the hill, and the outhouse on top, right? So this was their method for dealing with less crap. So it's totally understandable why they're looking for certainty and looking not to waste the effort they're putting in, and looking not to have angry customers when they release something that they thought they were supposed to be building, but they should have been building something else. So this is the Agile process, right? You review the requirements, you plan, you build. That's sprint 1, sprint 0, whatever, right? Sprint 2, you review what you built and the rest of the requirements, you plan, you reprioritize the backlog again, and you build. Sprint 3, same cycle, right? Same cycle. And I think it's fair to say a lot of times Agile is kind of contrasted against waterfall. I think it's fair to say that waterfall, you review the requirements once, you plan once, and you build once. Reviewing the requirements, redoing the backlog every 2 weeks, and building, it's not really more efficient, right? People a lot of times think Agile's faster, but it's not. You just get the dog and pony show every 2 weeks instead of every 3 months. It feels faster. But the important thing about this loop, and this loop is super important, right, is that the reason why Agile thinks this loop should be shorter than the waterfall process, because this is essentially still the waterfall process, but the reason they think you should go through the loop faster is because you stay closer to your path, right? So I took this great slide that I took out. I say it's great, but I had this ex-girlfriend. She was into like magic with a K, and there's this book on advanced chaos magic, which was a hoot to read. It was really funny because I don't think any of those guys actually it's all about will and just doing stuff. It's not really about magic. It's funny. But they have the chaos magician's view towards divination, like predicting the future, is that the future goes like as a cone like this. So right next to you in time, you have really good certainty about what's going to happen. But 3 years out, there's this huge range of possibilities. Okay, that's a problem that's why Agile goes through this so fast, right? Why bother predicting 6 months out the way Waterfall does when the cone of probability is huge? Just do 2 weeks. You have this much. So you do 2 weeks, you predict, you figure out how far off you are from your baseline, adjust, and do 2 weeks more. So you never wander very far off from what your vision line is, right? That's why they get to the loop quickly, is because of the certainty. Right? So it reduces the risk that you build the wrong thing. And they're obsessed with the question, is this what you wanted, right? That's why you do the review every 2 weeks, right? You go back to your stakeholders and say, hey, we built this. Is this what you wanted? They say yes or no. Based on that decision, you either build the next thing in the backlog or you build it again. In theory, right? It never goes like that, but in theory, that's what's supposed to happen. so now we're going to talk about lean, where Agile wanted to focus on building certainty. Lean wants to focus on learning certainty, and that's pretty cool. I mean, I think that's why a lot of people in the UX community like lean, because we like learning things. Not that engineers don't, but we like learning things about the product, right? Does it work? What do the customers like? Lean focuses on a different kind of certainty. Instead of focusing on certainty about what they're going to build, right? They're trying to get a sense of certainty around what is most valuable. So why do we build this, right? And they don't really care about existential things. Does it convert more, right, than the previous version did? And so Lean has a whole set of tools that they use to kind of support this validated learning. They're big into cohorts. They're very specific about tracking their metrics, right? Which are things that a lot of people are kind of sloppy about. So that kind of very rigorous approach is fantastic for actually measuring your assumptions. As opposed to Agile that seeks to minimize unnecessary change, Lean wants to maximize necessary change. That's the whole point of validated learning. Has everybody read Lean Startup? Probably not, but it's a pretty good book. It's like a head book, and that it kind of makes you think differently, so that's a good thing. The idea there is, right, is in a startup world, Reese's basic premise is that in a startup world, you don't know anything for certain, right? And the faster you figure things out, the faster you can get to profitability. So it's not that Lean doesn't want to change. They want to change as fast as possible until they find the most viable option, and then they want to milk that most viable option until they cash out or scale to 1 billion users and retire. So, so they want to maximize necessary change. And I guess I should say Lean Startup here instead of Lean. Sometimes Lean just refers to like the manufacturing process, but bear with me here. And because of this, Lean values learning over everything else. So whereas Agile focused on build, right? We're going to do the build because that's certain. We have a product with code we can point to, right? No uncertainty. Lean values learning, right? They want to get through the loop as fast as possible so they can learn, so they can pivot, make the change, and then measure the next change, right? Because they're trying to get to the maximum value. For Lean, learning represents certainty. The more you learn, the more you have removed bad hypotheses from your mind. This is the Lean process. Build, you measure what you built, and you learn, right? And part of this is Agile, for example, focuses on the build. But in order to build something, they rely on the plan, right? Which is why that kickoff meeting with the backlog is so important. That's their crutch. Right? They focus on the build, they rely on the plan. Lean, similarly, right? In order to learn, they have to rely on what they're measuring. Well, so, does that make sense? Right? This is what they're going for, but they can't get to this without the previous step. Which is odd. They spend a lot of time, in both cases, they spend a lot of time on the third circle. How do we do this? Awesome. But the key part, right, of their value proposition is the previous circle. They spend some time there, but less. And in this case, Lean's velocity through the loop increases the risk they're going to build the right thing, the most valuable thing at some point. And that's the question that Lean's obsessed with. Any questions so far? I'm kind of like glossing over 20 years of thinking here. So it's okay. So now we're going to talk about design. And I'm going to use the words design, experience design, and user experience interchangeably. And this is a slide that my friend in Australia said was total bullshit. So that's good. So if you're agreeing with him so far, you're in good company. Agile is about building certainty. Lean's about measuring certainty, right? Design, Lean's about learning certainty. Design is about measuring certainty. This is the part he thinks of, right? Does anyone in here think about design as being about measuring things? Right? No. Okay. This is the part that gets me real excited, because I think that for a long time we've all just had our heads up our butts instead of kind of looking around at the world around us. So, this is how it goes. And you see, I took out the slides with the background here. What the hell? All right, so let's say you take these 3 points at face value. Design's focus on identifying uncertainty. Design seeks to identify change, and design values measuring over everything else. That was a part that my friend in Australia disagreed with. That measuring represents certainty. But think about what designers do, right? We talk to people to figure out kind of what do we know, what do we not know, what can we assume, what can we not assume. Essentially, what do we need to figure out, right? And then we build a model, right? So you make a wireframe, you make a prototype, you do a sketch, you do a PowerPoint deck, and then you take that to somebody, some type of audience, and you show that to them, and you say, is this right? Is this going to work the way you think it's going to work? Is this what you're telling me? Are we making the right kind of guesses? Are we asking the right kinds of questions? That's what designers do, right? They measure everything. And this is the design process, right? You think, make, check. And this actually, luckily enough, is Janice Fraser's response to Lean Startup was Lean UX. And instead of build, measure, learn, they said, no, it's think, make, check. I think it was actually Mike Kioski that came up with this. Oh, it says think. So think, make, check.
I like this one better.
Yeah.
We make a thing.
And you
That's
check it.
fantastic.
We make a thing and make it check it.
That's fantastic. So yeah, so you think about something, right? You make something to so you can evaluate what you thought, and then you check it with somebody, right? So designers, we're always looking at deliverables, right? What is this? The wireframes, the site maps, prototypes. This is what we focus on, but this is what that enables. So unlike the other two groups, unlike Lean and Agile that focus on this and they lean on this, designers are always looking backwards. We're always focused on what we're making when the actual activity we're doing is checking. Everything designers do is checking. And that's the question that design's obsessed with. Is this what we thought it was? So, as you may have noticed from the description for tonight's talk, I believe that there's a unified process. And I believe that that it's about designing certainty. And as a designer, I realize that I'm biased, right? I think everything's about design, but I'm pretty sure that I'm right. So these are the three processes, right? Agile, review, plan, build. Starts with review. Starts with blue one. Lean, build, measure, learn. There's design. Think, make, check. These are the same damn processes, right? These aren't competing processes. The difference between the three schools of thought is where you focus. My focus on the review, measure, check part. My focus on the build, make part, or my focus on the plan, learn, think part. Does it really matter? It seems to me that when you're at that stage of the process, that's what you should be focused on in the first place. So this is where to start changing the process here. So here's Agile, right? Review, plan, build. This is with Lean on top. Build, measure, learn. Right? Same process. Now we're going to add design on top of that. Think, make, check. Right? It all lines up perfectly. But the question is, what do we think, make, checking? Right? There's an assumption there, right? Those are all kitten words. There's something in the middle, right? And that something in the middle, I think, is vaguely obvious but interesting. So in all cases, there's a chunk of data that you get, right? So let's say you're starting a process. You have data. You have requirements. You have metrics. You have call center logs. You have stakeholder interviews. You have a product spec that was dropped on your desk, right? You think, plan, and learn about that stuff in order to make models. Models are sketches, wireframes, product roadmaps, product backlogs.
Information architecture.
Yes, information architecture. You use those models to make something, right? Make something tangible, right? Maybe you make, maybe you actually make a deliverable of some type, right? You make some type of artifact. It could be a product, be a document, could be a PowerPoint presentation. And then you check, review, and measure the thing you made. Right? So all of the different schools of thought do this. Same process. And I think that's the reason I think that's an important point is because one of the unspoken tenets between like the literature wars between Agile and Lean and design, right, is that they're different processes. And that's why you have all this friction between them. But they're not different processes. They're the exact same. Right? It doesn't matter which one you're doing all the same.
It sounds like what they are actually are different Myers-Briggs profile.
I think that would be fair. We've never worked before. He's a total stranger from the audience. Right? So where on the chart do you fall, right? That's people just kind of fall towards one end of the chart, and that's where they focus, and that's what they think is the best thing. And the worst thing about it is the questions that you ask, the questions that are kind of common place to think about now, right? Is this what you wanted? Or is this the most valuable thing? Or is this what we thought it was? Those aren't the right questions. Those questions assume just the focus on your little part of the circle. But every single process, regardless of what you're doing, you're trying to go through the loop, right? You're trying to go through the loop with some type of velocity so you can start the next phase in the loop, so you can start the next piece of learning, right? So it's all interconnected. If you focus on only one end, right, of the loop, you're not focusing on getting through the loop. Does that make sense? It's like you're on an oval instead of a circle. You're going to roll fast, roll slower. So these are the right questions, right? How do you create the data you need? How do you create the models you need, the artifacts, right? These are deliverables, right? This is why Jeff Gotthelf's presentation on Lean UX about getting out of deliverables businesses is misleading. That's fair because I'm not really saying you should abandon Agile, so I'm okay with the misleading part, right? Everything we do is about delivering something, whether you're delivering code or a document. You're delivering something. And the other important question, right, is how do you think, make, check? Those are your activities, right? Are you doing like chunking a bunch of post-it notes on the wall? Are you making wireframes or building websites, right? What are you using to actually check things? Are you doing a stakeholder review? Or are you launching something and running analytics on it? Those are the real questions you should be asking. All the other questions are crap that will distract you from doing a good job. These questions are questions that everybody asks and that everybody uses the same language for. And the great thing about using the same language is that now you can communicate with everybody on your team that were maybe previously you didn't communicate as well as you wanted to. So these are the key issues, right? This is, and I think this is the part where my UX colleagues might confused, as I typically talk a lot about like wireframes and sitemaps and stuff, because there are no wireframes and sitemaps here. But in order to get through this, in order to get through that cycle, right? The whole point is to make a model you can check with somebody. So you have to ask yourself two questions about the model, right? What are you trying to model, right? Exactly what problem are you trying to get at? What problem are you trying to solve? And what kind of model will work best for that? This is where like Agile and Lean really kind of butt heads with the UX group, right? The designers, being a modeling discipline, think, oh, we can always just do a model to check that. Whereas in Agile and the Lean startup world, they think, no, you have to have a product to check that, right? So the answer to the question is different, but the question is the same for both people, right? And the key to doing really great work isn't just having the answer in your back pocket. The key to doing great work is just always asking a question, right? Whenever you have to figure something out, what kind of model is going to work best to figure out what you want to figure out? The next important thing is the fidelity. If you've looked at prototyping, fidelity is a big deal, right? Is how close to the actual one should it look like? How close should it behave? Is a napkin sketch okay? Do I need a fully functional prototype? Can I use monkeys to test with, or do I actually have to have my mom, right? There's a whole bunch of fidelity you have to ask yourself about. And then annotation is important. Like, what does the audience need to know? And it might sound here, annotation is something that people do to wireframes, right? But everything has annotations. Like when you log into Amazon, all the text on the screen, that's annotation that's telling you what's supposed to happen. And there's a whole set for anything, any model that you're looking at, whether it's a napkin sketch, a wireframe, or actual product. There's a whole bunch of information on there that your audience needs to know about in order to validate your assumptions, right? There's tacit knowledge, implicit knowledge, and then explicit knowledge. And you need to ask yourself, well, what does the audience need to know in order for them to tell me what I'm trying to figure out? Give me the answer to what I'm trying to figure out. And all of this stuff assumes you have an audience. And I think this is another place where people walk into discussions already having the answer in their pocket, right? So with Lean Startup, the audience is always the customer. So I gave a talk a couple months ago in front of a Lean Startup group, and they're like, you're just talking about the team. You don't actually go talk to your customer. But, I mean, I've been doing this for like 15 years. I can do like 7, 8 versions of your product, evaluate from the team before you even have to walk out the door and talk to a customer. I mean, you don't have to talk to a customer for everything. But with Lean Startup, that's the answer. You walk into the answer in your pocket instead of asking the question. So the question is always, who's the audience, right? Who do you actually need to validate stuff with? When are you communicating with them, and where are they? Those are 2 important questions, right? So a lot of times, I do these. I just finished like 250 pages of wireframe spec. So it's ridiculous. I've been kind of iterating it over it for a couple months. It reminded me of right when I wrote the book, right? The book was like 97 pages or something, 120. Huge, huge problem. The reason I had to write this huge wireframe spec, which probably any UX expert in the world would tell you don't need to be writing big specs anymore, is because I was sharing with both executives and QA testers offshore, right? So, and I wasn't communicating with them synchronously. It was all asynchronous, so I wouldn't be there to answer any questions they have, and we weren't co-located, right? So this is a good example. This is also with the Lean UX stuff. So Lean UX a lot of times can dispense with large documents like that because everybody is co-located, right? All information is communicated synchronously, and you're sharing with the people actually building the product, right? You're not sharing with the stakeholder at the top. So with Lean UX, they walk in with the answer in their pocket. The real choice here is to ask the question, right? Sometimes you need to, if you're showing something right to the CEO, that's a totally different document than you show to a usability test, or when you show to the QA tester. Totally different models you're going to share. Totally different levels of annotation on them, right? So the QA tester has like on select, on hover, after 5 seconds, crap. The CEO has sign in box, right? I mean, totally different level of detail there. And this is how it falls out. So, this is hard to see. It's washed out. So, bottom. Okay, so there are. Oh yeah, this is better. Okay, we have to pan.
I'm panning.
So this is something I just did a few years ago, just kind of demonstrate what happens when you start twiddling these knobs, right? So when you start changing your answers to those questions about who you're communicating with and how they need to be communicated to. And it's just continuums, instead of continuums, but fidelity's on the top, right? Lower fidelity versus higher fidelity, right? You can use lower fidelity for someone who sits next to you because you talk to them every day. If it's a customer, right, you're not going to ever see or talk to in person, it needs to be have really high fidelity, right? That's real product versus napkin sketch, right? So I can do napkin sketches with my CubeMate. The customer has to have actual product. The annotation is the same way, right? So with developers, tons of annotation. With the customer, the only annotation is just information about, click here, the microcopy, etc. Iterability that's how fast you go through the cycle, right? So here we're going through really fast because it's cheap to iterate, right? We're scribbling on a napkin. When you're doing actually production code with customers, you iterate slower, right? So that's one of the questions that we have to ask is how quickly do we need to go through the loop, right? And how quickly can we go through the loop? Sometimes, like if you're dealing with metrics, like a large site like YouTube, they can run a test for like 3 hours a day, do an A/B test for like 3 hours a day, and they'll collect reams of data and have these really statistically precise results about what works better. Another site might have to run that same test for 20 years to get the same type of data. You probably don't need that amount of data, but that's the question you ask yourself is, what information do we need and how long is it going to take us to get it? Right? So sometimes how fast you go through the loop is governed not by how fast you can go through the loop, which is what Agile kind of focuses on, how fast can we go through, but how fast do you want to go through, right, in order to get the data you need. And lastly is the audience piece. So you usually show fewer people see stuff at this end, and then hopefully if you've got a good customer base, you see tons of people see it. Man, I was talking fast, but hey, here we go. Last slide, this is the unified process model, right? So you've got data models, artifacts, physical things that you deliver to people, and you've got the activities, think, make, check, plan, review, plan, build, and that is it. So, what do you think? Crazy? Clear? Practical? Useless? Seriously, I'm gonna take this on the road. This is like my DIY punk rock tour. I'm in the van. What's missing here?
So you mentioned designing organizations, which I believe in as well. I think UX is sometimes the driver there. But so some of the things that you mentioned were kind of symptoms of a broken organization, like non-co-located teams. I understand that it's a reality that needs to happen in some cases, but also according to these models, that organization is broken, right? Because to work correctly, you should be in a co-located team, and it is all about the people. And so how do you
Well, I'm using an analogy to address that. Earlier today on Twitter, I don't know, do y'all have let's the conversation start this way? So earlier today on Twitter, some friends of mine were talking about design education and the problem with like you don't have any junior positions, all the junior designers suck because they don't have any experience, you only have senior positions but no senior designers, blah blah blah. How do we fix this? And the answer was studio, right? Studio, which is if it conjures up some guy in a beret in a big open room with some other people in easels and painting and nice light coming through the windows, that's what it is, right? And the argument there was that in order to teach designers the skills they need to know, right? So, and just so we'll take a quick segue because this is from the slides I yanked out. Designers do four things. They model four things. Remember, design is a modeling discipline. They model users, they model interfaces, they model interactions, and they model systems. That's all they do, right? Those four things. Their contention was that you can't teach a designer to do those four things unless you have them in a big open room with a guy in a beret who's like the master, can walk by and tell them how to touch their work, right? Even if that isn't bullshit, that needs to be bullshit, because if you require good work, right, to be based on how a room is laid out, right, whether or not your company has cubes versus open floor plan, whether or not your teams are co-located or remote, that just ghettoizes huge chunks of people, right? So, and if once you're ghettoizing a huge chunk of people, then that's not like an educational process you can take forward and teach people. That doesn't get you anywhere. You have to have something that is universal. So I don't think you're always designing inside and outside, right? You're designing your team, at the same time you're designing the product for the outside. Like co-located things like that are structural, I don't think you can say are symptomatic of broken organizations. It is different to work with people who are remote instead of co-located. I will totally grant that. You need a different set of. You have to have more annotation. You have to be more explicit sometimes. But you just change how you work, right? You don't need to change what you do. Does that answer?
Yeah, but you're still building, a large amount of stuff, and that stuff may or may not be right. I mean,
Yeah.
like with the 200-page wireframes, like, were you testing those locally to make sure that you're on the right track, or is the first time you'll actually see a actual person is after it gets partially built in another country?
Oh no, with like we do like 3 or 4 reviews a week with the client. We have 2 or 3 reviews with the developers every week. We've done like 4 weeks of usability assessments like all over the U.S.
Okay.
Like my personal style is, and I didn't design it this way. This is how I evolved. Is I go through that loop as quickly as often as possible. Sometimes the trip through the loop is to make sure there aren't any typos. So when she shows it to her boss, right, she doesn't get a random comment about typos, which is ridiculous. Like, you've got 100-page of like detailed spec, and you're bitching because I transposed 2 letters in the word V. But I go through that as best as possible, and that's possible with remote teams too, right? You can go through. In fact, all the remote teams I've ever worked have been successful. We had daily check-ins where we talked about what had been done. This is typical Scrum type stuff, right? I mean, you still have to go through the loop. A big spec doesn't mean you take 6 months to do it and you hand it off, right? That's retarded. One of the things that Agile does well is insist that everybody's in the room. And this is another slide I yanked down. But see, I had like 10 minutes. I could have just left them in. So Agile leaves everybody in the room, right? The one good thing that Lean does is they focus on measuring. They have all these really good tools for measuring things. And the one thing that design does really well is it's really good at assessing what type of model is good enough to get you the answer you want. You want to do all 3 of those things, right? You want to have everybody in the room. You want to go through the loop quickly. You want to be making the appropriate models. You want to be measuring everything so you learn, right? You want to be making a hypothesis, right? And then measuring your hypothesis. You don't just want to throw it out there and see what happens. You want to say, well, I think this is going to increase conversions, or I think this wireframe is going to blow the CEO away, right? You make some hypothesis and see where you got. That's validated learning, which is what Lean Startup does really well. And I think that those are 4 things that make anything you do, regardless of what your background is, fantastic, right? Iteration, right? Speed through the loop, getting everybody in the room so you have all the proper insight, measuring what you do, and figuring out what the best way to communicate that is. Yeah, I forgot your question, right? Okay. Okay.
You're doing the right process. Just because of this particular company, you had to spend a little extra time in one part, but you're doing everything. You're iterating fast.
Yeah, for this
Where you
case,
can.
I need the model
Where you can.
at a certain fidelity. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think it's like what we said earlier, even before we did the presentation. It varies sometimes depending on the situation. You have to figure that in some cases, you know exactly what the problem is, you know exactly how it's going to turn out. And so that loop, that process is much, much, much quicker. You know, there's a lot less fidelity involved in it. Then other times it's like you have no idea, you know, exactly how it's going to turn out. And so it may require that you have developers in the room. Those developers need to go and at least give you some rapid prototypes to kind of give you an idea. Is this doable? Is this going to work? The other times it's obvious right from the get-go. And so it varies in terms of how much time you have to spend on any given thing.
And this is something else now we're talking about this board's doing here. It's, with a client that I'm working with right now, that my company has been working with them for a year, a beautiful conversation. One of the things that's, when they came to town, one of the first things that I spent a whole lot of time really trying to dig into that nobody had done up to that point was, what is the life of the things that we're given in terms of where we could be a little more rough in our deliverables and what we were talking about. Those relied on the fact that the people at the table were able to make decisions about it. But when we began to dig into what was happening with some of the other things that we were providing, we used to have to go marching up the hill, we had to go before executive groups and folks like that. There had to be more presentation time, and there had to be more polish. And so as we began to hammer out what's going to be our means of operating going forward, it cobbles together some things that are very document heavy because there's a necessity that they're not going to budge. In fact, we started talking about lean. Nobody even said so, but the thought that they wouldn't have this documentation brought up fear in the room and panic, and we lost probably 20 minutes settling it down and saying, no, we know it's not going anywhere. But we did find a handful of areas where we could get away with pictures from the whiteboard or sketches from a conversation they have at the table because they weren't going to have to see a level of visibility that requires the ceremony that in a large organization sometimes you simply have to have. So going forward, we're going to look at every spot along the way and in the early stages, find out who's got to look at what we're doing. And where we can make the decision at the table, we're not going to worry so much about the presentation and the polish. But where they can tell us, yeah, this one's going to have to go up to mahogany row, then we can say, okay, this is going to take more work. Let's go ahead and account for that too, because that takes time. So does it line up with an archetypical version of what lean ought to be or agile ought to be? No, it's a mashup, but that's the whole point of the exercise. Even if you read, what Jeff Coppell and others have said, it's not about a religious shift in the process. It's about looking for opportunities. We hope later on to be able to get them to loosen up in a lot of other areas, but what we did is make a few inroads. And just like anything, if you can, what you can tell somebody about how great something is usually doesn't work half as well as having them see it, experience it for themselves. Then they want more of it. And so when they see the benefits and they see the speed and they see that we're able to move things along without trying to put the same level of polish into everything, they're going to try to find ways to implement that more.
But you are changing the organization. That's awesome. That's great.
Right now.
Except for you guys also charge by the hour, so I don't know.
Not in this case. Not in this case. This is a whole different deal. This is like agencies, ongoing service contract, dedicated resource kind of thing. It's kind of a big ballgame for them. To a certain degree, there's like unlimited work. We are there to do whatever it is they want us to do for a period of time. So burn down isn't being calculated that way, but it is being calculated in the absence of money. It's going to be calculated in time. So it's a slightly different context and conversation, but it's the same conversation.
Yeah. And you should always be a change organization. Like that's the only way to come through what happens is to up-level everybody around you. Like your team, teams adjacent to you, your boss's boss, right? You drop the nuggets, plant little seeds, everything gets better. And it takes time, right? Because people are slow and lazy and don't want to change, and that's cool. That's how people are, but you want to change your organization, and that's where you really get like levers on doing better work, right? Having better teams and building better experiences. Mm-hmm.
Could you give maybe a real world example or two of where you saw the greatest amount of clash and conflict problem are you just trying to solve?
So that's a fair question. I kind of see I see the world kind of like in boxes and arrows, like this. I can see things. That's how I see them, and I'm always trying to line them up because I'm probably vaguely OCD, right? I don't know why. Sometimes I don't know what problem I'm trying to solve. I've been doing work with Agile and Lean teams for years, and one thing that I guess the problem I'm trying to solve is you go listen to someone from either side, right? Agile or Lean or design, and you hear this just litany of crap, right? And these people are not stupid. They're experienced, they're familiar, they're smart, they've thought about it, they've talked to people from the other side about the solutions, and I guess I was just trying to figure out why, if the customer was always right, why did they think that? And so at some point I got to the process, and I think it's not that the process lines up. I think if you draw 3 circles with arrows in a circle, right, I could probably do this like Space Shuttle Challenger, making cookies, right? Do 3 and just line them all up. But it is interesting, though, how they have these 3-word mantras that line up. I don't remember that table I showed. They line up straight across the board. And everybody does a process like that. It's not new. That's something very human, right? Like you see something, you think of what you're going to do, you act, you wait to see what happens, right? That's think, make, check. That's how humans are. We're trapped in time. Like, so I don't think it's interesting the other process. What I think is interesting is that the questions we ask about how to work better in that process are just asking about the wrong things. We're not asking about how fast we can or should go through the loop. We're not asking about who we're communicating with or what they need to know, right? We're all asking the wrong questions. And I think that was just interesting to me, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that helps. Mm-hmm.
Talk about measure a little bit. Starting out, there is nothing to measure in some cases because you don't have a before and after statistic, really.
Oh no, I think that's something that design brings to the table, is that design will just make a guess. If it doesn't know something and it needs to know something, it'll say, I'm making this assumption. And this is something I do, and I actually, Adam was telling me a story earlier where he talked about he just made an assumption, right? But design is really good about saying, I don't know this, but we're going to assume X, right? For the purpose so we can get on, right? Make the model and go through the loop. We're going to assume X. And at the end of the loop, we'll be able to test whether or not our assumption was right. So you can always there's always something you can go off of. But right, in terms of like what's real or not real, then yeah, you don't have the after data until you've had it before. Yeah, and vice versa.
Can I ask a question? Joan and I are actually working on a project, and we have a client that doesn't really know what they want. Okay, so our assumptions are we're trying to help them figure out what they want. So it's like they know they have a problem, but they can't even identify what the problem is. Am I explaining that pretty well?
They're not very.
They're not very savvy. This is a project for Dallas Gift Camp, and so we've been assigned to a nonprofit. They have a website that doesn't do anything. It's it's not even it's not informational at all, and so we're really trying to dig in and figure out who they are and what they are. They don't even know enough to help us identify the problem.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I'm trying, since that's something we're actually working on, I'm trying to apply this to that. And in this particular case, like we worked on a couple of deliverables, and I told Joan, I said, I don't want to show this to the client because they're not going to understand this. They're not going to get what we're using as sort of a shorthand. And so how could we apply this unified process when, and I'm sure other people have had situations where you're dealing with a client who really just doesn't get it. They know there's a problem, they just don't know what it is.
Yeah. Well, there are tons of things you can do. I mean, there's this entire workshop industry, right? But I think what's illustrative about that is that's a common thing. Someone walks in and they think they don't know, right? Or you think that they don't know. But if you remember the mind games from the beginning, the customer's right? So it's their organization, right? They know what's most valuable. They know what they have assumptions about what's most viable. They have assumptions about what they want people to do for them, and they have assumptions about how it's going to work. Right? It's not that they don't know what they want. It's that they haven't been able to articulate that problem. Right? Which is, I think that's probably why the customer's always right thing is important. Is because a lot of times the reason you disagree with somebody isn't because you disagree with them. I mean, maybe it's because you're not articulating the same way, right? And that's
that's definitely true, because it's been frustrating to talk to someone who doesn't really know how to use email. When we're talking about a website. I mean,
blessed ignorance.
Isn't it that kind of way though? Like, it's always the old adage that people don't really know what they want until they see it. It's like, for instance, like a good example, and although I always bring up Apple as a great example, but the iPhone. I mean, when the minute that came out in 2007, there were so many people that looked at it and said, "Oh, that's not going to work. It doesn't have a physical keyboard. It's going to suck. No one's going to buy it. It's just going to fail." And then once people got it in their hands, they understood it right then and there. They knew exactly. They're like, "I needed this the whole time, and I didn't even know it." And sometimes it's like I always say, sometimes it's like throwing darts at a problem. You know, you can throw so many darts, and it's not until once you get that one bullseye, that's all you need. It's satisfying.
But in that case, the customer wasn't right, because the customer didn't know.
Exactly, but that's why you sometimes have to throw darts at it and see what sticks.
No, that's not true. Because you and I were talking earlier about how when you finally got an iPhone, you're like, "This is the most awesome thing ever." You did know. You just hadn't articulated that.
Yep.
But they were able to suss that anyway.
So I thought it was a really interesting example when we're talking about this, because the first one was kind of a piece of shit. I mean, so was everything else.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not saying the no keys were good, but so I mean, no apps, no multitasking.
Speaking of iPhone.
It was, I mean, as a phone, was terrible.
You mean the first iPhone?
The first iPhone. Yeah, I mean, the new ones are fine, right?
Okay.
But they spent. It could have been designed better. They could have spent more time building. They could have spent more time prototyping, and they didn't do any of those things.
Nope.
I mean, they're doing them now, but they did them after release. There came a point where it was like, okay, you know what, this thing is good enough to sell, so let's sell it.
Yep.
And keep working.
Right.
But wasn't it
And
ironic?
the thing that I think design tends to resist is, well, no, it's not done yet. No showing on this. I would be just mortified if it goes out like this. I mean, it goes out, everybody loves it.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's the thing where I think the overlap is I don't, it's just striking me oddly, because with lean it's like, okay, we'll get it out there and let's find out whether it's going to fail, because we might be wasting time. Let's build it and not worry so much about the plan, because we can't plan for the future, so we might be wasting time. And the designer's like, oh God, no one can see it. It's got to be right. It's not right yet. I mean, people tell a designer you're spending too much time thinking about this, but you don't go to someone who's practicing Agile. You're spending too much time building that. You're spending too much time analyzing that. I mean, it's like design is kind of the brakes, and it's very interesting.
Well, I think and I don't dispute your thought, but I think it's not the design as the brakes. It's the design believes it can answer those questions using a model. Right? Whereas the other people in the organization thought they can answer it with a real product. Right? So it's not the brakes, right? You're both going through loops, you're just going through different loops, and it's the friction between the two that feels like brakes, right? But I think you're right. Designers should always ask, right, is this good enough for us to figure out what we want to figure out? And once it reaches that fidelity, it should go on, right? You should put it out there and measure it.
And as a designer, what is it that your algorithms were trying to find out?
If your assumptions are right, whatever those assumptions are.
Funny thing enough, we had a presentation not too long ago about a guy did about getting to done. And sometimes that's one big problem that designers have, is understanding when to quit. And that really, to me, in this illustration, is really how many times you're going to go through a loop till you actually arrive at how that you've gone far enough.
Well,
and the iPhone is a good example, because they they could have done better, but they probably got to a point where they said, yeah, we could spend another year on this, and it could be 10 times better. But we've gotten to a point where we know it's good enough to get out there. And the funny thing is that even though they got it out there, and we say, oh, well, they could have done better, it was still like 5 times better than all the other piece of crap phones that were already out there.
That's true. But I think, just to clarify, the loop isn't just for, like, the real product, the actual iPhone that was released, is just a model of what the iPhone's supposed to be, right? It's not the real version, it's a model. And this is version 1, and it's the same thing with the prototype. It's just a model. So it's not that you go through fake versions until you validate to release. No, the release is another fake version that you're using to validate assumptions.
You're always in beta.
Yeah.
You had a comment and then
That was
It's the
actually
Google
my
model.
point. In the old world, and see, I've been around IT for a while. So, you know, there was this idea of people would talk about when code freezes on a certain date. Well, baloney. When code would freeze as soon as it was written, is when it would freeze.
Yeah.
And as UI people who weren't in the black box writing the code, we had to model in order to have any say at all, right? You had to model something. As is the case, anytime you're modeling anything, there's either you can't work in the real thing, or the risk is too high, or it's too expensive, or once you pass this wall of deployment, it's etched in stone. I mean, you don't do spell check. The granite carver doesn't do spell check after he's put it in there. And that was always the case with software. But that assumption is no longer that. I mean, so in my experience as a usability guy, I found somehow there's this magic number, 5 iterations. It seemed like one iteration is just a stab in the dark. Second one says, hey, we're onto something. Third, you have a good concept, and by about the 5th iteration, yeah, we've got this pretty nailed. And with lean UX, lean this whole schema, we're just taking those latter 2 or 3 iterations and doing that in the product, which we could never do before.
yeah, that's true.
And we have the tools, the analytics, to test things that are running live, and we can do A/B testing and create these pilots and beta test groups and gather this data. And guess what? The code is actually because the technologies, HTML5 and stuff, you can actually modify something. It's not a nightmare. Oh my God, you want to change what? You want to change the spelling of something? Oh no, it's going to be 6 months, right? So if this is actually thinkable.
Yeah, that's true. You were going to say?
As far as your and Joan's concern is, I think you've got the answer, but you don't know it. And the gentleman here brought up the iPhone, or y'all brought up the iPhone, where it was handed to somebody and it was what they wanted and they didn't know. I'm in a similar situation. I develop things for people who haven't even asked for something. I did their job in the past, and my job is to make tools to get them to do their work better. So I decide, well, when I was doing that, this sucked, so I make a tool that fixes that for them, and they didn't even know it was coming down the pipeline, and they're handed it, and they're like, oh, thank God. Okay, well, you're in the same boat. You've got a company that apparently doesn't know what they want. They don't know how to use email. You're in the unique position of they don't know what to evaluate what you produce against. Give them something, and you'll probably find out that they're in love with it because they don't know that there could be a better way of doing it. So you've probably spent enough time with them to understand something of what they need. Give them something, and that's probably all they need, and they'll probably be thrilled to death with it.
A warning though, there's times when somebody can have the magic thing in front, handed to them, and they still won't get it. It is possible.
Sure.
So,
And maybe it's not quite right, and give them another iteration. But you got to start somewhere because they don't know where to start.
We got 5 minutes?
I think where we struggle, and this is just here with me, sorry, there's like a fail point where how much is enough? And you have to have somebody around who has a propensity for being able to see that, who can listen to the conversation and look at what's going on and be able to say, you know what, we've just crossed that line, we're overthinking at this point, and everything that we've still got to work on, even if we get it all done, is only going to add this much in incremental value to what we've done. The real value's already happened, it's here. And unless we've got something to consider that really just brings this thing to its knees and makes it not work at all, it's time to start, it's time to put bow on.
Yeah. And I'll tell you.
That isn't something that's not something you can really codify. You have to look for those people around who have that sense and have that understanding and willingness and ability to say, time, guys.
Well, I come from a different standpoint because most of you guys are UX designers, developers. You guys come from that side of it. Honestly, I'm a strategic planner. I'm the one who's coming in at the beginning of it and saying, here's your creative brief, here's who your audience is, here's what they know about the product now, here's what we want them to know, and providing that information and working through the entire process with the UX, IA, design, development, being that person that he just mentioned, saying, time, guys, we've hit what we needed to hit. By putting this out there, we're going to get the consumer from A to Z, that's the whole goal of the entire process. And so,
We're just getting them from A to X.
exactly,